All right, today this video is going to be about intrinsic male hierarchical value and exploring the topic of male hierarchical value from a looks perspective, like a perspective, like you can look at a guy and say, oh, he's on the hierarchy this high up, just based on his looks. So, which you might dispute because you can go up and down on the male hierarchy, absent of looks, but I would argue that on the female perspective from that, you're not necessarily free from your looks, even if you have high status otherwise. Anyway, plus I think if you're one of, I'm going to use numbers to represent the hierarchical values of men, 1 through 10. I'm not going to use 10, so 1 through 9. And I think each one of these numbers intrinsically has certain merit and value that other pieces of these numbers don't. And I'm only going to cover numbers 7 through 9 today, I think. But I might do 6 or 5 too. But 7 through 9 are the ones that interest me the most. Probably because I'm an 8, objectively. And I don't exactly mean that like I was saying before from a looks perspective. I mean that in sort of an intrinsically valuable perspective. Because if you're an 8 out of 10 man, you're probably not the tallest, but you might be tall, or you might be average height, or just short, slightly below average height, not like ultra short or super tall and like jacked, but you might have some muscle. You might be thin naturally, but have a little bit of muscle maybe. Most of the time you have muscle if you're an 8 out of 10. Like a little bit of muscle. You're like, one way I put it once was, the world expects us 8 out of 10s to be giants of men. Like giant football players. But really we're more like their shadows. And that's what I'm kind of getting at. And I guess football players isn't the right comparison, because some of those guys are 8s out of 10s and not 9s. But like, just imagine like a big guy, 6'4", 6'8", something like that. We're not those guys, you know. Like, we pale in comparison physically, which goes a long way evolutionarily. If you're bigger, you're way better off. But yeah, usually, unless you're like a successful merchant or something. But even then, but like if you go from like a warrior perspective, and even a modern one, bigger is better. At least in white society. In Asian society, it's a little bit different, but I don't want to cover that right now. So basically, like if you're an 8 out of 10 like I am, and I know I'm fat right now, so it's not as obvious, but basically I have like a little bit of muscle. Like I'm stronger than average. I'm like quite a bit stronger than the average man or whatever. I'm smarter than the average man. I'm a little bit psychotic because of what I understand about the world. Not like actively psychotic, but can be a little bit like, not neurotic, but like brutally, I guess, I don't like the word neurotic because they used to use that word for women in the 1950s. But my nerves are definitely not, they're very sensitive, I should say. So I have a quick reaction time. Anyway, but that also, if I'm scared of something, I might like start shaking sometimes. Not everybody's experienced this, but a lot of people could or would under certain circumstances. And it doesn't really matter if you're shaking, it just kind of matters that you get the task done in front of you, whatever you're trying to do. But, yeah. Anyway, so I think it's intrinsically valuable that an 8 out of 10 who's white might exist because it's important that you have these men to remind you of why you're fighting for what you're fighting for. And to remind you of, I don't know, sinful ways, I suppose. Because I think besides like 6 out of 10s, like 6 out of 10s are like born into sin, in my opinion. And you could tell just kind of by looking at somebody that just, he's above average looking. He's not a good guy, unless he's deeply religious. But even then, it's hard to break your genetic coding. But even if you ignore genetic coding, you have to be pretty devout to not be sinful. And everybody's sinful, so I'm taking a religious perspective on this because the numbers you use to rate people only make sense from a religious perspective. Anyway, and if you're 7 out of 10, you tend to be too good. Like, and temptation is there for you often. I think. But 8 out of 10s, it's kind of like I want to explore for a second what the 8 out of 10 can experience from women. Basically, just about any woman's ready to like fuck you. Like just about. But they also kind of want you to be a provider. And I think this is different from like a 9 out of 10 who like they want to fuck him like no matter what, basically, usually. And an 8 out of 10 maybe gets a no every once in a while because he doesn't have his shit together. Or maybe he has his shit together, but just she wasn't in the mood or would rather be with another guy. So you get passed on by and you have to you develop this Rolling Stones mentality of just like go on to the next woman. And if she's interested, then you fuck her. And you develop this after realizing that you'll never find a life partner. Or whatever. I've been using the dating app Hinge. That's why I said life partner, because life partner is the word that they use, or the term that they use on Hinge. Anyway, so it's very interesting to see how like an 8 out of 10 develops this mentality of women are mostly whores, and I'll find a special one, but she won't be that special for that long, probably. And if she is, then I got really lucky. And she most likely won't be, so this is my strategy sexually. And it kind of requires moving on from places. Think like motorcycle guy going from town to town. or just living on the edge. Criminal activity, think about that. Criminal activity happens a lot with 8 out of 10 guys. But not all the time, just sometimes. And sometimes 8 out of 10 guys, they're like, a lot of MGTOW are 8 out of 10s. A lot of them are short too, like around my height, like like 5'6", 5, even 5'4", 5'9". But I'm 5'7", almost 5'8". But anyway, I wouldn't consider myself totally MGTOW. I don't label myself with that, but it is a facet of the manosphere or whatever that a lot of men fall under. It seems like it attracts short, sort of peaceful, non-aggressive type men who just want to have like a girlfriend, basically, and maybe don't have a lot of experience, maybe do have a lot of experience. But it also attracts other types of men, but that's the main thing I've noticed from my limited perspective. Anyway, I'm just speaking I might sound a little bit irrational. That's another thing about like an 8 out of 10 guy. He's a little bit more emotional than rational. Even if he's rational, emotions usually plague him. It's the same with 7 out of 10 guys, except for 7 out of 10s. Usually emotions are too much for them to handle. And if you're a 9 out of 10 guy, you don't feel that many emotions. Or when you do, they're deeper. Or something. I can't exactly understand it, but I've seen this with like bigger guys, like contemplating their lives or anything like that. And yeah, it's like a deeper thinking, and I want to say that I spent a lot of time deeply thinking too, but I can't really compare to those guys. I'm not that big. My brain's just not structured that way. I don't know. You know, those guys are usually hyper masculine, like Jocko Willings. Is that his last name? Anyway, like Jocko, the Jocko podcast. Like he's gonna be kind of a deep thinker. I wouldn't say he's that much of a deep thinker, but him or like The Rock. Even though I don't completely agree with what they think about this, I think the smartest people are definitely the smartest men who are white out there. Are usually 8 out of 10 guys. At least when it comes to street smarts. Like the most savvy are usually like the most good at like warfare and the most good at like getting women and developing strategies for like getting like any kind of effort that the society may want done is like 8 out of 10 men because they have a little bit of muscle, but they also have a little bit of smarts, and they can kind of think and then do what they need to do at the same time. And they're perfect for that, and they're usually used for that. And they're almost, I don't know if the word would be a slave to it, but anytime I've ever had to go to work, I remember thinking, I'm doing everything on the fly, and I'm doing it better than almost everybody else there, unless they're like me. And I didn't really know what like me meant, unless you put a number to it. But like in a brotherly way, yeah, it's... Anyway. I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent there a little bit, but... Anyway, if you're a 9 out of 10, though, you might be a little bit dumber, but you understand things in a deeper way that most people can't understand usually. Or that's the only way I have of understanding it. How like a bigger guy who's in charge could possibly know anything, because they usually seem dumb. Tactically, at least. But maybe if you're, I don't know. That, you know, that old, like white people didn't really have this happen too often. We're like the middlemen. And the middlemen they weren't usually in charge, or if they were, behind the scenes were some bigger guys who were 9s out of 10s, if you want to number them. And they orchestrated what would happen in subtle ways, historically, in like warfare and other things. I don't have any proof for that, and I'm just speaking generally, so it might be hard to grasp what I'm saying. Even now, if I'm an 8 out of 10, I'm not going to grasp if anybody has a plan for my future or not. Like I'm not gonna quite get it because I'm the one living through it, or that's how I rationalize it. And then again, maybe it's not my place to. I don't know, but yeah. And I think historically, that's how, if you were an 8 out of 10 man, that's how you would rationalize your place in the hierarchy. Just you would put it up to fate, destiny, and honor, and you would fight hard and do your duty, and that would be that. And other men who aren't like physically powerful in any way, like I'm not saying I'm necessarily that physically powerful. Like I know guys who are like twice or even almost 3 times my strength level, but my strength level is still like 5 times that of an average man or something. So historically there weren't like a lot of average men unless they lived in like city states, which were produced by warring men like me. Yeah. And I'm not a criminal anymore, but I was temporarily. Anyway, when there's nothing to war for, I don't know, there's no rationalization for it, but the rationale would be like, if you don't have anything to fight for, you need something to fight for. But anyway, that's not exactly what motivated me to do what I did to get into trouble. But anyway, I'm an ex-criminal, and that's common. That's not commonplace, but fairly common amongst 8 out of 10s. They push the limit sometimes, and it's because of that emotional mind overriding the rational mind. Even right now, I'm a little shaky right now. I'm a little trembly right now. Because I drank too much coffee. That's the rational mind rationalizing why I'm trembling, but I'm also trembling because of my emotional response to the coffee. So there's 2 things happening there. And it's not an emotional response to the coffee. It's a physiological response to the coffee that triggers an emotional response to the physiological response. And maybe I learned that from being around psychologists over the years. But that's why my hand is like shaking like crazy, or was shaking like crazy a moment ago. And why I can kind of control myself and calm down now. Anyway, I'm also older, so it just gets easier as you get older to do that. But anyway, I found something else that's interesting about 8 out of 10 men. Like, think about these single mothers out here. Like, there's a lot of single mothers, and a lot of them are gonna have 8 out of 10 children. Like when they get older, like over 18, obviously, they'll be 8 out of 10 men. And I'm not gonna talk about the women. Like that. Yeah, whatever. That's different. I don't know everything about that because I'm not a woman. But some of these mothers are going to have like boys who could be like warriors when they grow up. And I think it's important that these men have like good father figures around to teach them. But they won't, because that's how it works. Because those 9 out of 10 guys slept with a bunch of women, and now we just have an epidemic of single mothers. And anyway, I can't be a father to somebody who's not my own child, is my perspective on that. And don't get me wrong, I probably could do that, but it just seems like a terrible idea. So yeah, once I get back to working, I'm just going to find a woman to settle down with if I can, which I might be able to. Just because of my looks. But yeah, anyway, going off on a tangent again. Anyway, single moms who raise these warrior children into warrior men, they're going to have to play both roles, and it's not going to work out well. It'll lead to a lot more criminal activity, which I'm not ambiguous about it, but I am somewhat ambiguous about it. Like, that's the natural progression of that state of affairs. And the court system doesn't do any good for them either. I don't know. But it's kind of a mess either way you look at it. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent. I'll make that into a different video, maybe. I think I just put it into this video. So, anyway, if you're an 8 out of 10 man, and you could say, like, just middleman. Maybe I'll say middleman from now on. If you're an 8 out of 10 man or a middleman, because if you didn't know, 8 out of 10 really is more like the middle or even the lower middle of the hierarchy. If you're a middleman, kind of working, kind of just rolling stones, passing around town to town, not necessarily sleeping around with everybody, but sleeping around occasionally. Or maybe even staying in one place and just working a job and kind of just living peacefully. I don't know. That's just kind of what we do. Like, it's kind of what we do. And other men aren't good at doing this alone. And if you're younger middleman or whatever, then you're not going to be as good at it, and it might even be sort of painful at first, but like you'll get used to it. But that's kind of the new meta that isn't new. That's kind of how it's always been, except for in like the 1950s, where women were going through hell, and disputably, like women didn't really enjoy their husbands that much, probably, or we wouldn't have women's rights movements. But women also don't enjoy getting just plowed by the biggest guy ever having his kid and then never seeing him again. I mean, they sort of enjoy it, but not really. That sounds kind of like hell to me. I mean, sure, you get a kid, so your lineage is passed on, but that's the good thing about that. But that's about it. To be brutal about it. But anyway, I've noticed that if you're an 8 out of 10 man, a middleman, as I'll call us from now on, it's intrinsic in you. Like it's not just your looks. Like your looks came about from this intrinsic value that you have genetically that allows you to do things that most common men can't do. But you're not as great as like these larger men who are more in charge. Like, for example, a lot of 9 out of 10 guys do better than 8 out of 10 guys in modern society. And maybe if we look at Asian society, the good thing to do is to be an 8 out of 10 and lead, and then the 9 out of 10 sort of watch them and follow them. And that happens with whites too, but to the degree to which it happens, there's always, if you can think of that weird movie, The Wizard of Oz, there's always that big guy, the big face, who's in charge, but you don't know where he's at, and he's behind the screen controlling everything. Like, I sound paranoid, but no, my point is there are like larger people at work doing things in a bigger way. And one example of this might be President Trump, who I think is going to win the election. Like, what is he, 6'3"? He's like 6'3". Like, that guy. And the only problem I really see with what they do in terms of like policy, in terms of like policies, like if you're in a company policy, or politically with Donald Trump, his sort of policies is that they usually disregard the little guys like us to an extent, and we just have to kind of pick up the legwork and do as we're told, and like we're little boys or something. Like in a corporation, that would be very obvious, I would imagine. Anyway. And in other words, I don't want to fight in someone else's war when I didn't do anything myself to involve myself in it. But as is common throughout history, you get charged with fighting in a war. Not charged as like blamed, but like given the order to participate in a war, and then you have to go. Anyway, a lot of middlemen, a lot of 8s out of 10s find themselves in the middle. And this is where there's some sort of like great confusion, in my opinion, where it's just, why are we warring? And we are sort of like little boys in that regard, that we wonder why, but it's sort of our duty, and it's and our honor's at stake, so we fight, and then that's what happens. And if you're a 7 out of 10, you go along with it too, and everybody else dies or cowers. if it's warfare with firearms. And if it's not, then there aren't any weaker men who are going to war, and they've already died off probably somehow, or they're in a city state historically. Anyway, sort of a scary topic to talk about, but I started out with using numbers like the rating system to describe types of men, and I'm sort of like leading you down this pathway to show you what types of men have to do what their roles are in like a war sort of scenario. And the point of that, I guess, is just to enlighten you, just to show you that not all men are created equally, although we are. Although that's a good idea. That's a good idea, I think, to put on paper. I think definitely we're definitely created equally in the eyes of God. It just doesn't play out that way on earth. And everything I say is actually not a rule of thumb or anything. It's just something I've observed throughout my life. So the hierarchical structure, if you're white, is usually the big guys are in charge, and it trickles down from there. And if you're Asian, the slightly more muscular 8 out of 10 guys are. That's why in religion they always ask for faith, by the way, and like with Christianity, like faith in God. That's one reason why. Also, you should have faith in God, because it will bring you peace and comfort. But in Asian societies, they want you to meditate and to think, and that's so the bigger guys can think things through more and follow what these smaller guys who are a little bit smarter have to figure out. But whites, turns out, are the smartest historically as far as inventions go. And that's sort of a phenomenon where we have some big guys who are just geniuses, and then we have a bunch of betas or 1 through 5s who are also geniuses, and it's just like an outlier type thing. And that's sort of a weird quality that white people tend to have when they reproduce, which is a big reason why they don't want you to reproduce. Anyway. I'm not going to end the video yet. I'm going to keep talking about something. Also, if you're wondering, like, if you're an 8 out of 10 or whatever, I'd say it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant knowing your number. But if you want to know, like, just look in the mirror, like, do you have any bit of, like, protruding muscle? If you're still growing, that doesn't even apply. You can't even tell for sure if somebody's going to be a warrior type or a civilian type until they get older. And sometimes you can tell when they're younger, but for the most part, you gotta wait until you develop further. And you just hope for the best in the meantime. It's not exactly the same in every culture. They don't do that way with every culture, but yeah. Anyway, I've gotten quite fat. I ate a dozen donuts yesterday. I have no idea why I decided to eat a dozen donuts. It just sounded so damn good. And now I'm drinking a ton of coffee and staying away from fast food. I gave up fast food for Lent. Lent's a Christian holiday where you give up something for 40 days to represent what Jesus did in the desert, which was give up food and water for 40 days. Most people can't do this, so we just give up something of our choosing. So, yeah. Anyway, my hair is really long now too. Like, I have long hair. I need to take a shower. I got pretty dirty today. Well, I didn't get dirty today. Like, I don't know. My mom has a hot tub, so I got in the hot tub. I'm at my mom's right now. Anyway, to talk about, like, middlemen or 8 out of 10s is just... Everybody assumes that if you're an 8, that means you just look good. Or women like you. Or you're a Chad or a Chad light. Or whatever. That's what incels say, you know? Like, they don't necessarily know what it's like to be anything other than what they are. Which is something else on the hierarchy which we don't want to understand. Ugh. What else? What else did I miss? What did I miss? Basically, I don't know. I feel like a slave sometimes, and I feel like rebelling. Like, I feel like everything I do, I just have to... I don't know. I just feel like... I don't know. That's another thing about middlemen or 8s out of 10s or whatever. Warrior type guys who aren't, like, very large and have a lot of control over themselves. Even some large guys don't have a lot of control over themselves, but they tend to have more control, it seems. But me, I'm not very big, so I sort of... I've lashed out before, and I'm older now, so I'm not going to lash out as much, probably. Not just probably, but definitely. It's just, the older you get, the less fight you have in you, even if you have a lot of fight left. Anyway, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You might have just as much fight as you had in your 20s, but your energy levels aren't going to be there. I don't know. So, one way that a society might be constructed is more religiously than this society, because it seems like... Maybe I shouldn't get into this right now. I'll make this into another video. Anyway, I'm gonna title this one Middlemen, and we'll go from there. See you later. Bye.